Hi everyone, welcome to Tech Talks. Today we have our lovely guest, Christian, and he is an INFP. And he has a Twitter that I'll link below. Today we'll be talking about the INFP personality type. And so, Christian, what are 3 words you would use to describe yourself?
I think I would describe myself as passionate, intellectual, and sensitive.
Yeah, the extroverted intuition has a very intellectual side. I can see
Yeah,
the FI is a very empathic soul, so I could see the sensitivity there too.
yeah, absolutely. I've always been like a bookworm, nerdy kind of person. I've always been interested in kind of academic, esoteric topics and pursuits. But yeah, the FI definitely there's a definite sensitivity there. So,
So what are these esoteric pursuits that you talk about?
so eventually, like I do want to go to grad school. I want to get my PhD in political science. Is my thought. So I'm really interested in studying political institutions, particularly in the historical past. So like studying political institutions in other countries and seeing like particularly what are now considered developing countries, and really trying to figure out how institutions evolve over time and which institutions are best in order to foster the most freedom and political freedom, individual freedom, and also economic freedom as well, and growth.
That sounds like really a lot of freedom. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. How about hobby topics that you have?
Oh gosh, anything from like tech to fantasy. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I mean, it could be the philosophy of language. It could be music. I used to sing in choir, so I'm really interested in like choral, classical music. I mean, just it runs the gamut of a lot of different weird things that are random, but I enjoy it. I enjoy them.
For sure. Yeah, all the interests. And he's all the interests.
Yes, it's just like consuming, all the different stuff.
That's lovely. What are 3 words other people would describe you as?
Oh, it's always a hard question because like I'm not always aware of how people perceive me. Like the only time I'm aware of that is like if they actually say something to me. So, but the words I've heard used to describe me are that I can remember are thoughtful, emotional, and awkward.
It's an adorable type of awkward, okay?
Oh, thanks. So, sometimes I don't feel it's meant that way, but but I appreciate that.
So, yeah, well, in what ways do you find yourself to be awkward? What do you think it's comprised of?
I think it's just like not social awareness. So I'm very much in my head all the time, and I also have ADHD, so I'm not like very cognizant of my outer world. I mean, and also like I'm SE blind, so I will either maybe say things, and I'm not like cognizant of like that it's socially appropriate to say those things, or sometimes I might stand in front of people by accident. So if like there's a group of people and we're talking, I will maybe stand in front of them and not realize that I'm doing it when they're trying to like make a circle and talk to other people. So it's just like so that just kind of awkwardness, I guess. I'm not very aware of, I guess you would say, social convention. So I guess I find myself in situations where I'm doing sort of what would be considered awkward things, and then people tell me about it afterwards. So
No worries.
yes.
Awkwardness is good. Awkwardness is sign of your authenticity.
Thank you. I like that reframing of that. I'm going to use that.
So yes, Christian, what are 3 words you would describe INFPs as?
I would say we're like really fiercely individualistic. I would say we are deeply introspective, and I would say that we are very imaginative, but like in sort of a childlike, whimsical way. So I think it's a funny trope that INFPs, we're viewed as like wearing flower crowns and skipping in fields. And so, although not all INFPs do that, but I think the sentiment there is kind of is sort of accurate. So that's how I would describe INFPs.
Yes, for sure. That's a really interesting bunch of traits. Yeah, that fierce individualism from the FI, the firmly knowing your values and where you sit with those.
No, I mean, like, since it's our dominant function, like that's kind of just like the core of who we are. INFPs, we spend, pretty much all of our lives trying to figure out who we are and where do we fit in this world. And so it's a constant process of gathering in information with our NE and then kind of sifting through it, with our FI and seeing like, does this fit in with my value structure system or not? And then using SI to either like discard it or like concretize it into something more enduring. So it's a constant process and evolution throughout our entire lives. So, and I think that's what that process of trying to find out who we are and what is meaningful and special to us is really what gives INFPs our unique individuality, and it's why we fight so hard for us to be able to express ourselves in the way that we want, and I think that's where that individualistic mindset kind of comes in.
Yeah, for sure. And there's like INFPs or like NPs are called like the seeker in the fact that they're like figuring out who they are. They're on this journey to figure that out more completely.
Yes, I love that word. It is a constant search, and it's this like this insatiable desire to figure it out. It's like this driving force, and so we're just constantly just looking and seeking, never ending. It almost feels like we'll never be satisfied. But I think it's what keeps things interesting, is this kind of just this constant seeking out and of new possibilities of what our identities or what meanings could be to us.
Yeah, it's like exploring the plethora of meaning to like satisfy
Yes.
that FI or TI inside the NP.
I love that. It's a perfect description.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing, Christian. So my next question for you is, what are some core features of INFPs?
Kind of a lot of the stuff that we've touched on, but I think kind of going more into it, I think the way that we figure out our identity is this deep introspection. So like that's a core part of who we are. There's a constant just like inward gazing. I've heard the phrase self-referencing, because we're constantly looking inward at ourselves, and that's like a really big part of how we figure out who we are and what we're feeling, what our needs are, and just this constant sifting through process. So we're very very introspective, and we are very and as a consequence we're very self-aware. So that's a big feature of the INFP. And then I think this is what also, this kind of introspection, it's what kind of creates like these dream worlds that we're so famous for, because we spend so much time in our minds kind of like really exploring. I like Michael Pierce's words. He says like they're like caverns. And it's so true. Like we're exploring the caverns within our psyche and our consciousness, to find the different hidden beautiful treasures that kind of await inside us. And so I think this is this kind of exploration is how we like construct these dreamlike worlds. I think of Tolkien in Lord of the Rings, and just the imagination that he had in constructing this world building. I think that's a really big core feature of the INFP. It's why it's a big part of why we're so introspective, and we don't like being always outside in the real world, because I think we're afraid that the TE reality will taint or tarnish the purity of our imaginations and our idealistic worlds.
Yeah. So that's it's really good that, like, it's interesting that you touched on that, like the idealistic quality of INFPs. It's like they have they're known for like daydreaming, and like,
Yes.
so I guess with being idealistic, does it ever make you believe in like the best of a situation? And on the converse, you talk about like self-awareness too, how you're very self-aware. Does that ever cause you to be like very tough on yourself because you're so self-aware that you become more harsh on yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Both of those things are very true. So even though INFPs can be, I guess, a lot of times we're viewed as like sad or melancholic, but we do have hope. We do have that there is that idealism and this purity, and so we do try really hard to see the best in really people a lot of the times, and in situations, of course, but we really try to see the best in things. And I think this is why sometimes we have a deep sadness in us, because we often are disappointed with the reality, and it's hard. I don't want to be like, oh, woe is me. Like we have, so many difficulties just because our expectations don't match reality, but it is a feature of us. We definitely do idealize things and try to see the best in things, and so it's hard sometimes when the reality doesn't always match up, and it really kind of sometimes, depending on what it is, it can really kind of destroy us internally. But we still, in spite of that, we still trek on, though, because there's always this any possibility of maybe this other situation will bring some sort of congruency between our imagined world and the reality. So I think that's where that hope comes in. But I also think, like you were saying, that because of that, this idealism, there's a tendency for us to be really hard on ourselves. And, I don't want to speak for all NFPs, but I definitely have a sort of like perfectionistic streak of, I have an ideal in my head of what I would like to be, or I would like a situation to be. And if I can't execute that, I'm definitely really, really hard on myself, beating up myself a lot, and obsessing, especially the notorious FI-SI loops of just going over and over in your mind of all the things you could have said correctly, or all the things you should have said, or all the things you should have done or could have done. It's sometimes, yeah, it's a lot.
Yes, it was really fascinating how you mentioned the perfectionistic streak that, INFPs have. So I noticed this trait with IPs, or people who lead with like FI or TI. What happens is it causes like crippling perfectionism. And what happens is sometimes they don't put themselves out in the world because they need it to be so perfect that they end up just like, it's crippling. So if you're experiencing perfectionism, it's either like you're experiencing the grip of like an FI or TI function, and it's like causing you to want to be perfect, because these functions, what they're responsible for is refining. So it's like you see all the areas you could refine more if you have like a grip on the FI and TI, but sometimes it causes you to stop action because you can see all the ways that it could have been better. And yes, so basically, as an INFJ too, like anyone can have perfectionism, right? But I just noticed there's a really strong correlation between perfectionism and IPs and inaction.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think, this kind of goes to like the behaviors can be like the outcome behavior that we observe can be the same for all types, but it's about the process behind how you got to that behavior. So like, I know INFJs can be perfectionistic too, because, they have the internal vision. But if they don't have an extroverted judging function to kind of get them out of their heads, they will always stay within the vision inside their mind. And it's, with IPs, it's somewhat similar. There is it's not necessarily that we have a vision of the future, but it's an idealism, maybe like a platonic form or something, or it's and so there's this, and it's kind of like an enduring kind of idealism, right? So it's not about, like I was saying, about a future thing, but it just kind of is.
Yeah.
And so there is this paralysis. Like, I love that word. Like, it's just like you're so paralyzed. There's this fear of that the reality is never going to be how great you envision it in your mind. And I can't tell you how many times, like, I've been so afraid to like actually do something because I'm afraid of me messing up somehow and not living up to my own ideals.
Yeah. And I wonder if the idealism is like a symptom of the INFP and their disconnection from reality. Because, blind spot SE, what that causes is like a slight disconnection from the reality around you. And because you have that, you're more likely to develop an idealistic look on the world because you're like have degrees of separation from, and you bypass the actual reality. That is the
Yes.
SE.
No, I think that's so spot on, because we don't have an external point of reference. So our reality is really constructed just almost entirely in our minds. I mean, of course, like we have NE and SI. So like, but those to me are not, I view them as like impressionistic paintings. So they're not like actual, like, having a photographic lens on the reality. It's more of like an impression of the reality. It's more abstract. So you have that layer of remove already with our perceiving functions as they perceive reality, and then as they filter in through into our internal system, our internal FI, then it becomes even more removed for reality. So we don't have a very concrete SE reference point. So yeah, I think that's why. I think it ties back into like the dreamy aspect of INFPs, but it also it really ties into why we're so idealistic and oftentimes unrealistic about things.
For sure, totally. Yeah. Like what SI and NI do is they have the totality of stored information that you have. The thing with SI is because it's like storing these like actual sensory things about your life, you're not experiencing the actual sensory thing in front of you. And that can cause you to have like a disconnect from it. And yes, and so to not get too much off topic.
Oh, right, yeah, because I could have kept going more with that, but yeah.
Are there any more core features of INFPs you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so I think we have a wonderful capacity to listen, and to be compassionate and empathic. It's different than FE, but and we can get into that later. But I think we really just have this wonderful ability to be really understanding and just like holding space for people, to just be who they are and not trying to impose any sort of agenda or any sort of our own values onto the other person. So I think, Dario Nardi said that when he's done brain scans of INFPs, the center in the brain that's for listening really lights up very strongly. And I think that's because that's a core function of who we are, is we listen very carefully to what people are saying, especially the people that we care about the most. We really want to be present with them, and also in kind of the in holding space for them. We want to let them know in non-verbally that like by us listening and holding space for you, like we're here for you, and we are not. This is a no judgment zone, and you're allowed to feel and express whatever you want to feel. And it's funny because like with me sometimes, people will open up and they'll say what they're feeling, and then they'll say like, oh, I know that's weird, or that's a weird thing to feel, or whatever. Oh no, that's crazy. And I always say like, no, that's not at all. Like that's totally valid. And I think INFPs are really great at stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Daria Nardi calls FI, how it shows up in brain scans, is listening with your whole mind or listening with your whole being. So
Yes.
INFPs, their strength is the ability to listen deeply and to hold space for your FI authenticity that everyone has.
Yes.
So they hold space for the you that is most true about you.
I love that, and it is absolutely true. Like we want so badly. This is why sometimes we probe, in addition to listening, because we want to get to know people on a deep level, and so we want to like pull that FI out of people, so that way they can be their most authentic selves. We want to show them that it's okay to be their most authentic selves.
That's beautiful. And so what do you comprise of authentic self? What does that mean to you? What does that word mean to you?
Just being true to what your values are, what's important to you, and what your needs are, what your emotions are. Just being true to those in all areas of life, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in finding a job, a career, what you want to buy, just even something like as simple as that. Just tapping into the wants, needs, values, and making decisions based off of that, and it being true to who you are. I think there's a lot of social pressures to do one thing or another. So there's a lot of difficulty because there's social feedback loops that discourage, I think, authenticity, because I think as humans we're social creatures, and we want to we still have tribal aspects built into our DNA. And so we want some sort of conformity, so that way there can be kind of harmony, and the species can survive. Those are vestiges of our earlier human selves. But in a world now where we've evolved, and we don't have the dangers that we used to have of just being eaten alive, it sometimes can be counterproductive and forcing people to fit into molds or roles that that they're not comfortable with, and that is not authentically them. So I think that's, for me, it's a very long way of saying that's what that means to me, is just like tapping into those emotions, values, and needs, and being confident in expressing them regardless of social pressures to be the opposite of that.
Yeah, it's like, forget social norms. You need to like stay true to what is right, or like what you value. Yeah.
Absolutely.
For sure. That's great. Thank you for putting it that way, Christian. You mentioned this word self-referential too, and I was wondering if you could go a bit into that and your experience with that. What do you mean when you say that?
So I actually stole that from Enneagram. So fours are self-referencing, so are sevens and fives. But I think that applies generally to INFPs. So we tend to. It's not like a selfish focus on ourselves, but so an example that I can think of is if somebody's. So we tend to think of our emotions first before we think of others. And again, this sounds way more narcissistic and selfish than I think it really is in practice. But that's how it kind of plays out. Like, as an example, I can think of, so if somebody's like opening up and they're talking, like a friend, for example, and they're talking to me or another INFP about like a terrible experience that they had, we will reference ourselves, draw from personal experience, and say like, I totally understand. I went through something similar, blah, blah. And that's kind of like our way of relating to somebody else. But yeah, it's the focus is on the I first, rather than the object.
You're already in tune with your own preferences, or you're in tune with your own value system. So you can't really ignore that when the world clashes with it. So It's
Exactly.
just, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And
cognitive dissonance.
yeah, like FI and TI, I think that they try to avoid cognitive dissonance in like different ways. FI and TI are very similar because they're both like JI functions. They just share a lot
Mhm.
in common. But so what they do is like they're the part of you that wants to avoid cognitive dissonance. Like the FI will want to avoid the cognitive dissonance with what is like right and true with themselves, and TI will also try to, but TI is more on the accuracy side, whereas like the FI is more about the authenticity side of
Absolutely.
avoiding cognitive dissonance.
Absolutely. And like it's funny because like there are definite differences between TI and FI, but there are so many similarities, and I think that's why I tend to get along with especially INTPs. I get along with them very well, because even though like we might be seeking different truths, but we're still seeking a truth. And
Yes.
so the process is very similar. And we do want to be true to ourselves, whether it's true to our values that are personal to us, or whether it's to some sort of like objective or external or principle, which would be for TI. But it's still very similar. So like we get each other on that level, on a deeper level like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Dan calls FI the soul and he calls like TI the consciousness, because one is more of like objective principles and one is more like subjective, but value system. But they're both objective in their own way, I guess. Like it depends on what you define as objective, because FI is just as valid as TI, and I feel like calling it subjective takes away some of that like validity. But it makes sense because FI is more personal. I guess like that's what you mean. Like I mean that's what people mean.
Exactly.
Like FI is more personal and TI is more impersonal because it's more impartial. Yeah.
Exactly. No, I like that because I think if people are not used to the phrases in Jungian typology, they might think that subjective means like less valid, but it actually just literally means about the subject.
Yes.
And objective means about the object. For FI, it's about like what's true for the individual, and sometimes that does correlate with what's objectively true in reality. But I would say it's like more contextual. TI reminds me of like general theories or axioms. Like I would say like the theory of relativity is a great TI kind of principle. So it's true in like it's like a kind of a generalized framework that's true in all situations. Like it doesn't matter, what time period, the theory of relativity is going to be true regardless.
Yeah.
So it's a little
Yeah.
different with FI.
For sure. Like TI has some sort of universal property to it, trying to look for that universal axiom.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Awesome. So back on track.
Oh yeah. Of
So what
course.
are some famous INFPs that you know of?
So of course, typing other people like celebrities is kind of fraught because we don't always know if they're being like putting on a role or if they're being authentically themselves. But what the people that I know of that have been typed as INFP, and there seems to be consensus in that, Fiona Apple, musician, singer, songwriter. Eddie Redmayne is apparently an INFP actor, British actor. And then Soren Kierkegaard, he's a philosopher. He was an 18th century philosopher, father of existentialism. And then St. Augustine is supposed to have been also an INFP. So those are the ones that I'm aware of.
Yeah, man, I love Kierkegaard. He's my boy.
Yeah, same. So I heard him referenced as a sad boy, so I like that. So because I can relate.
Yeah, yeah. Something about Kierkegaard is he had his own ideal world. What I notice about like INFPs or like NFPs is their ability, some of them, like taking on multiple personas. So I thought what was
Mm,
INFP about Kierkegaard is that he would write in different pen names. And I was
yes.
like, it's very like FI to create different like people and like be able to like embody the spirits of different people, because it's like FI can know how it really feels like to be you, like put themselves in your shoes and like feel it.
Exactly.
And then because my ENFP, what she would do is like on games, she would create different personas, like a completely different person that she wasn't, and she would just embody that. And it doesn't apply for all FI users, but this is like a byproduct of FI I see. And I think it's because of their ability to, like, you know, Dario Nardi says, deeply listen to people. And through this, they can generate like these like personas, like these vivid personalities. And that's
Yes.
probably why they also make good writers. Like
Yeah.
I think that J.K. Rowling, although she self-types as INFJ, I really think that she's INFP, and she is able to draw like vivid worlds like Harry Potter.
Yep.
And so that's an example of that too. My question for you, Christian, is how do your cognitive functions show up in your life? So let's start with FI, your dominant function.
It's so hard to like think of any like specific examples because it's just always on, like, so it's just happening constantly. I don't always, you know, it's like you're not thinking about it. But I think where it kind of shows up in my life probably is just just in really any decision that I make. You know, like there has to be some sort of like congruency between my values and like, you know, what I want to do. It could be anything as simple as I don't know, what do I want to eat? I don't know, you know, or a job or career. It shows up in my constant reassessment of like who I am and what certain things mean to me. You know, and seeing if that's in alignment with who I am in that moment. You know, it comes up in just my hypersensitivity to a lot of different stimuli. Just the deep kind of like emotional gut feeling about something, gut reaction. It just really is kind of like who I am, you know? So yeah, it just shows up in a lot of different ways.
It's that like follow your heart type of thing inside you. It's like knowing if
Absolutely.
it's congruent, if it's in alignment, if it's like something that yourself is okay with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that really a kind of like a personal example is, I can now think of is like, I actually went to law school. I graduated with my law degree, and you know, I struggled immensely during law school, and I really didn't like it. I was having a difficult time. It's a very SITE field, and so it was very, very stressful for me. I didn't know it at the time because I wasn't into Myers-Briggs, but now that I look back at it, I recognize why. But you know, and afterwards, I had a real kind of like, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Is this like what I'm passionate about? And I couldn't find a reason like how that being a lawyer would kind of fit in with my values or what I was truly passionate about. And so for that reason, even though I went through that entire process of going to law school and graduating, I was like, I can't do this and be honest with who I am and what I want and what is important to me. So I left. And so, you know, now I'm on a different path.
So yeah, Christian, I loved what you had to say about FI, and it's so true. I find that with my FI user friends, they really want to follow their heart and do what is true to them. And what happens is like with my ENFP friend is she switched from multiple different majors in her post-secondary schooling because she realized that it didn't vibe with her authentic self. And the thing is, like with FI, is like when something doesn't vibe with your authentic self, it's hard to keep doing it. You almost feel convicted to not do it. So then now you have to like switch in some way. And so, yeah, FI has this pre-chance to like, if something doesn't jive with it, it has to go in another direction. It feels deeply convicted about whatever it does, and it has to like listen to that FI.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's exactly how I felt. It's the cognitive dissonance thing again. It's like you can't ignore it. It's just like gnawing at your insides, And so until you respond to it.
Yeah, so like FI gets this rap for being selfish, but it's not. It's more of a selfishness is a byproduct that people see because it's like FI is just trying to avoid that cognitive dissonance. And so it knows that things are out of alignment with its values. And what happens is it has to stay true with its like what is true to itself. And so to other people, that might seem like selfish. But like selfishness is a trait anyone can have. Like it's not only like an FI thing, but it's like FI can be the most selfless because if the situation is immoral and they're picking like the other option, then they're technically the only one who is in the right at that moment. So
Absolutely.
that's my defense of FI. And
Thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah. And so I would like to ask you about extroverted intuition and your experience of it.
For me and for INFPs, the extrovert intuition, of course, is in service of our FI. But how it shows up for me is just the insatiable appetite to consume all kinds of knowledge. It's kind of like the stereotype of, the browser and having like 30 different browser tabs open. You just go down the rabbit hole. I mean, like this happens a lot when I get really interested in something. This is how I've developed some sort of like very odd, like, esoteric interests. Is like Wikipedia ones are the worst. Like I'll be researching something. I'll think, oh, okay, like that. I've never heard of that before. That catches my attention, piques my interest. So I'll like a Wikipedia, and then I'll see something. Oh, I didn't realize that. Like tab. Another tab. Read that. Oh, that's really interesting. Tab. So, and it just keeps going and going. And then I hear about poetry, and all of a sudden I'm learning about 12th century Old Spanish and how it was developed, so it just like goes from here to here. But that's how it kind of shows up in that respect, but also just in kind of like the imaginative like possibilities of what could be, imagining future selves, like of I could be this, or it could be that, or it could be this, and then it's also just the trying on the different identities, right? So like, does this fit? Does this possibility of me fit? Does it fit within my framework of who I am and what I and what I value most? So and then just kind of like this hopefulness, like I think that's what I love so much about being an INFP, but also just NFPs in general. It's just that we have this like inner child, this childlike quality, not childish, not like immature, but like childlike, and so what that lends itself to is just kind of having this like wide-eyed wonder of the world, of just like the infinite possibilities of the world and what could be, and it's so sad because I think we as adults, we lose that inner sense of childlike wonder, and I think that's such a crucial part to hold on to. And so I think also like this part of this dissonance with INFPs and ENFPs, it's like we struggle very deeply to like to not lose that side of ourselves, and not to like subject that inner child of ourselves to like the harsh realities of the world. We want to keep that wonder alive, of the hopefulness and like the different possibilities. And so like that's kind of how I think it shows up for me specifically.
Yeah, that is fascinating. So with extroverted intuition, like NE and SE, extroverted sensing, have a youthful quality to it because it's like seeing the world with fresh eyes. But one is like NE is seeing the metaphysical world with fresh eyes, and SE is seeing the actual physical world with fresh eyes. So there's this youthful quality to NE. And so on the contrast, NI and SI are like you kind of feel like an old soul with those, because they're more about the totality of your stored knowledge. So you relate everything new you see to a known piece of information is SI and NI. So you're going to feel a little older and a little like a grandpa with those functions.
That's so true. Like, it's so funny because like throughout my life, I've always been told like, Christian, you're an old soul, aren't you? And it's kind of true. Like that's why I think NFPs are so interesting, particularly INFPs, is that like we have these interesting like dichotomies about us, almost maybe contradictions. Whereas like we have this youthfulness of just like endless possibilities, but also just this very old soul to us, which is like that NESI. So like, yeah, I've been, I feel both. I feel both a sense of childlike, childlike spirit, but also like this sense of like being an old soul. So, and people tend to notice that. It's funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah. It's interesting when you have NE and SI in the middle of your stack, then you're both a young soul and an old soul together, and they dance together.
Exactly. Beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. And so I'd like to ask you about your SI, Christian, and your experience with that function.
So the way that shows up for me is just in like the sentimentality and the meaning of whatever. It could be objects, it could be places, it could be memories. So my SI is very deeply attached to my FI. It's very hard to like separate them. But like, because what my SI is doing is it's it's kind of taking in these it's analyzing these like subjective experiences, and it's kind of looking at them in detail, and it's a very what I would say, it's like ontological. Ontology is a study, is a philosophical study of what is. So SI is constantly figuring out like what is this, what is that, like what are the properties of this. And so like it gets into kind of fine granular detail of like what is. So for me, it could be like, what is this experience? Let's get into the details of that. What does that mean to me? And then it concretizes that, and then it then gets kind of put into like my FI value system. So that's how like places can have certain meaning to me. It's how objects can have meaning or sentimentality, even though they're just like objects, because there's a certain attachment. My SI has concretized a certain meaning or attachment to that, and then then that gets put into my FI system. Also does it with emotions too. So with my emotions, I think there's this idea that FI knows all 50,000 different shades of particular emotions. But I think it's because of that SI combing through the details and specifics of like what is and what, parsing out and categorizing, and then it gets internally stored. And so that's how we have like these different shades of particular emotions. I was just even talking the other day about how I miss, I was talking with a friend, I miss the library. So I don't live too far away from my university's library. And there's something about being in the library with books and just knowing that there's just like this possibility of knowledge contained in all those books. There's something very comforting about that to me. And so like I haven't been able to go, I go kind of frequently to do my own research for things, and it's like my safe space. And because of this whole coronavirus thing, I haven't been able to like go there because it's shut down. And so like there's a sentimentality, there's this missing of like being in this comfortable space. So for me, that could be my university library or the beach or something like that. But yeah, so that's kind of how that works for me.
Yeah, I love that SI, like calling it what is, and it's storing what is. That's a really good way to put it, Christian. And so I'd like to ask you about your TE. How is it like to have a baby TE?
It's as with any inferior function, it can be incredibly stressful to use for an extended period of time. Again, just like this is why in law school I was so I had such a hard time, because I was constantly forced to be using my SITE. So I would say like my TE is maybe a little bit more developed than other people's, because I was, if I didn't develop it, I would flunk out of law school. So it was more out of survival that I had to get into that. But that's why I was sort of depressed during law school. But TE is an interesting thing for me. I both admire it and I fear it. I admire it because I can see the awesomeness of what it can do, the potential of what it could do, this assertiveness, just this confidence in going through the world and like kind of knowing, being very sure of of yourself and being able to kind of exist in this external world and being confident in maneuvering through these systems. And so there's something really admirable about that. I wish I was that way. I wish I was that assertive and confident. There's something kind of a little intoxicating about that power, especially when you feel kind of more reserved and kind of withdrawn into yourself. But at the same time, I fear it, because, it's like the saying, with great power comes great responsibility. And in the wrong hands, it could do a lot of destruction and damage. And that part I'm fearful of that, of its power, because I don't know how to wield it properly. And then also TE has this effect of totally ruining every beautiful imaginatory thing that I've constructed, so I have this, what I think in my mind is going to be awesome, but then the practical reality of that is never what I imagine it to be. So yeah, there's sort of a love-hate relationship with TE. It can be antagonistic towards me. And so and then especially oh my goodness, in the grip state, it can be very scary. Just getting into that ESTJ grip mode, that TE is just, it can be hypercritical and just very biting. And it frightens me. I don't like that. It really stresses me out being in that mode. So yeah, there's an interesting relationship with TE.
Yeah. I love that description, Christian. TE is also like responsible, like when the INFP's FI is triggered, like the facts that they'll have when they spew it out during a debate is that TE too. And also another way that TE shows itself in INFPs is that INFPs are very represented in the category of people who hold PhDs. So because because INFPs have the SI and the TE, what happens is that they're very, very overrepresented when in the PhD category. So there's a correlation between INFP and a person who has PhD. I've seen it. Dario Nardia has seen it. This correlation. I don't know why it's a thing, but it's definitely a thing. And another thing that TE is responsible for is that because INFPs have TE, I see them also strangely in like the science fields, which is like empirical sciences. Like you tend to find some INFPs there. It's strange. So AJ Drenth calls it jumping the function stack. So some INFPs jump the function stack to their TE, and they like things like science, and which is a very TE type of thing. And so that's another way that TE shows up for INFPs.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
you make a good point, or you can go.
For sure. Yeah, thank you. So I was wondering, why are INFPs why do INFPs like to pursue PhDs? Just disclaimer, not all INFPs, but I noticed with some INFPs it's a trend. So I'm not saying everyone, but yeah, it tends to be the case.
I tend to follow that that observation. So I actually want to get my PhD as well. So, I decided that academia is my passion. And that's the thing that I had to be true to, and which is why I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. So, I want to get my PhD, most likely in political science. So studying political institutions, but, so why is that the case? So I think, yeah, it's like this jumping the stack thing, this SITE. There's a couple reasons. So I actually talked to Dario Nardi. I met him last year at an MBTI meetup here in LA, where I live, and I told him I wanted to get my PhD, and he said, "Oh yeah," he's like, "I know a lot of INFP PhDs, a lot of INFP professors." Yeah, and so he said what is so. He's like, they make wonderful professors. He's like, they're very passionate about what they do, and they're incredibly, like, they have this, like, because it's of the SI. He's like, the SI creates this like really specialization in whatever they're studying. So they want to be experts, and that's so funny because, like, I have this passion for political institutions and political economy, but I felt like I was like, but I don't I want to be an expert in it. Like, I really want to know like all the little details, all the, the niche esoteric details about that. Like, I want to be an expert in that. Because I wasn't satisfied with just kind of having sort of a cursory knowledge, or kind of like any kind of knowledge. I wanted to have that more in-depth, expert status. And so I think, so the PhD thing also ties into TE. I think with INFPs especially, again, I don't like making broad generalizations, but I've noticed it, and also noticed it in me, is we tend to like the label thing, the certification thing, because I think it's a really efficient way of conveying a lot of information in just one, into like just a few short letters, MD, JD, PhD, like just contained in that means it's a very quick reference of like, oh, this person kind of knows what they're talking about, even though that's not always the case. But there's this kind of attachment, I think, sometimes to a TE like certification, like you have some sort of authority, and which goes into what you were saying too, of like with our FI, like we feel like sometimes we need to justify what we're saying, so we gather all this like kind of like TE empirical data and say like, no, like we're valid in how we're feeling or what we're saying. So I think like all of those reasons, I think, is why you probably find INFPs in PhD programs and becoming college professors, is because we want to be experts, we want to be seen as valid, that we know that what we're talking about, but also too, like I think the FI passion comes in there as well, like especially when we're really interested in a topic, we're really, really interested, we're very passionate, and so we want to explore all the possibilities of that, of what we're passionate about, and then we want to share that, I think, with people. So we want to kind of like extrovert that, but not necessarily because we want to like impart wisdom, we want to teach somebody, although I think that's part of it. But like, it's more of like a sharing thing. It's kind of like allowing others into our inner world and into our inner FI. And so that's kind of, I think, why also like INFPs like to become professors and get PhDs, to share that with other people.
Yeah, definitely. It's totally like a part of that SI need for specialization. So
Yeah.
Dario Nardi says that the region of your brain that is SI is one that is finely specialized. So it is actually like you take one pathway and you refine it, like, and put like a bunch of pathways to it. So it's becoming like an expert, SI expert at something. So yeah, definitely. So cool. And yeah, totally. I just cannot convey how much I agree.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. INFPs make great professors. And so the next question I have for you, Christian, is what are some misunderstandings about INFPs?
Oh, well, I mean, every type has their misunderstandings, but we have some that are unique to us. I think there's a couple. I think there's a misunderstanding that we're like always emotional or always sad. Certainly that's a feature of us, but that's not all who we are. We're not just a walking bundle of emotions. We do have very serious sides to us, and we also have rational sides to us. And I think that kind of also leads into the other misunderstandings, that we're not rational people, that we're highly illogical, that we are constantly led by like our emotions, and like just because it feels good, that we should do something, and that's not always the case. I wouldn't say we're any more rational than any other personality type. I mean, I know plenty of INTPs who are super rational. But it's unique to them, right? So like we're all irrational, but in our own way. So like that, I think that's a big misunderstanding, because I just really don't think we're uniquely irrational. I think the biggest one, though, that I kind of want to like dispel misunderstanding, is that we're selfish. And I see this sometimes, every once in a while, there'll be sort of some debates between FE and FI. And, it kind of goes to what you were saying a little bit earlier about like this kind of the self-referencing thing, that, we do look to our emotions first, but not like, it's not like a zero-sum thing. It's not like we look to our emotions at the expense of other people's emotions. It's just like we look inward first before then we look outward. But I think there's a misunderstanding that FI cannot be empathic or compassionate and understanding. And I think that's like absolutely not the case. I think maybe stereotypically I've seen some people think that FE is the more kind of like empathic because of the whole mirroring thing, but it's different, you know, so we're empathic or empathetic in different ways. So like, I think FE is good at like mirroring the emotion. But I think what we do as the way that INFPs empathize is we look inward first, and we draw upon like an SI experience, and then we put ourselves in that experience, so that way we can feel what the other person is feeling. So we're not reflecting back the emotion, but we're actually like feeling, we're trying to feel what the other person is feeling. So that way we can have like a deeper kind of connection with the other person. I think our FI allows us to be really understanding and empathic in a particular way. I was talking to a friend, and she was telling me that because she was training to be a marriage and family therapist counselor, and she said that the way that you're taught in therapy is actually a very FI way of doing things. So what you're taught what you're taught in training to be a therapist is you're taught to like really do a lot of self-introspection, reflection, and really truly understand like all parts of yourself, understand your thought processes, your biases, your feelings. And it is, and then it is through that deep understanding of yourself, then you start comparing that to other people and noticing other trends. And so I think this is how like INFPs really can connect with people and be empathic, is because we so understand ourselves that we then kind of can extrapolate and understand that like a lot of what we experience can actually be, is actually part of a larger kind of like human experience. So we can get at the core of like what humans are about. And because of that, like we can relate very deeply with other people. And so like, yeah, so that's how, like, I guess that's how you're trained in therapy, is that like, you know, to understand other people, your clients and your patients, and to understand them deeply, like you first have to look inward and understand yourself, and then that allows you to understand others better. So I think that's the biggest one, is that we can be just as empathic and empathetic and compassionate as INFJs or ENFJs, or FE Dom users. We just do it in different ways.
Yeah, it's like empathy in different ways. The FI user will, like, when you're experiencing something, look inward to themselves, to a time that they've experienced something similar, and they'll be like, how would I feel if I were this person going through
Right.
that? So it's like deeply
Exactly.
like looking into yourself and finding a comparable experience that you can like project onto that situation, which is extremely like kind and like very empathic and loving. So yeah, and it requires a lot of energy, so it can be also emotionally taxing. So I think that FI might be more emotionally taxing than FE in general, because they're going so deep into themselves in order to feel what you're feeling. So they'll feel like kind of like exhausted after maybe that process.
Absolutely. I love that you say that, because it's so true. Because we're not like reflecting back the emotion, we're actually like diving into ourselves. Like it can be very emotionally exhausting, which is why I think it's like important for INFPs to learn proper boundaries, because then we could, if we're not careful, we can really do a lot of destruction to ourselves.
That was well put. My last question for you, Christian, is what advice would you give to INFPs?
I'm at a point in my life where like I'm trying to, you know, integrate more of my lower stack functions. So the advice I give to INFPs is to not be afraid to like put yourself out there. Even for me, for this interview, this was kind of nerve wracking for me. And to just put yourself out there and be exposed in the spotlight, it's kind of a frightening thing sometimes. So I would say, like, you know, put yourself out there more, like be more willing to take risks, be comfortable with like the iterative process and the failure process. Like your idea doesn't have to be like perfectly formulated and conceptualized. in order for you to actually execute on it. Just like put it out, it's kind of like the personality hacker model, like tap into the NE more, like, do a lot of trial and error, like, explore different possibilities of your ideas and put them out there, see what works and what doesn't. And then find out what does. And if you fail, like, that's okay, like try something else. I think if we don't put ourselves out there, and don't have the confidence to like kind of put ourselves out there, I think we can, we'll do not only disservice to other people, but disservice to ourselves, and not really living a more fulfilled life, and being able to like embody and live out what we have in our minds. So I think, yeah, putting yourself out there more, advice is advice I'd give. And just also being easy on yourself. As we were discussing before, like we can be so perfectionistic. We can be so hard on ourselves. Like just like have grace with yourself, and be okay with making mistakes sometimes. And I think that's very connected to the whole like putting yourself out there, because there's a fear of like messing up. So yeah, just put yourself out there. Be kinder to yourself, and yeah, that's what I would say.
Be kind on yourselves, INFP. You are very tough on yourself sometimes, and so to just be nicer to your kind soul. And also, yeah, with developing like to just do it, I know like that the FI and TI will want to like refine more before you put yourself out there. But sometimes it's all about like, the SE slogan, like extroverted sensing, just do it, and
Yeah,
sometimes that's the cure to, get you momentum and to get you where you want to go. So yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do not sacrifice momentum for perfection, because that's like a trade-off that is maybe it takes you out of your extroverted functions and puts you more into your introverted functions, and you'll like loop more if you do that. So
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. That's great advice. Yeah, because it's very dangerous to get caught in the JI-SI loop.
Yeah, for sure. Any last thoughts, Christian? Any other things you'd like to say about INFPs?
We can be misunderstood a lot. I think because we can be private, or just because we can be very unique, and we're not always, we kind of go against the grain sometimes. And so that can be like a pain point for us. I think we really want to be understood. We want to share our deep introverted FI love with other people. That's all we want. We just want other people to hold space for us as well. So, so just, and sometimes we kind of feel like we're not part of this world. We feel we're alien. So I think the eternal struggle with INFPs is just trying to not only find our identity, but find a place where we fit in and where we feel comfortable, that people will fully accept ourselves, and who we are. So it's a never-ending journey. But I think that we have so much wonderful things to offer to other people. We have a lot of love, and we have a lot of light, that we can illuminate. And I think we have a specialness, a uniqueness in us, and we recognize it in others. And I think, we can really kind of bring that light to the world, and shine the light on other people as well in their own uniqueness.
Yeah, it's like making space for everyone's uniqueness. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that to the world, Christian. You're a very unique person with your
Thank
own,
you.
like, very, very special set of skills. You're getting your PhD, like, that is, like, so impressive. Like, wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to know a doctorate.
Well, if my NE doesn't change my mind again, but yeah, but yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah. So yeah, just thank you for using your sensitivity to benefit us, and to be so kind and loving and empathic, and that you're able to, you know, really put yourself in another person's shoes and like truly feel it for yourself. I love like your strong convictions and like the idealistic way you see the world, and just you're very like headstrong with your values. It's very like individualistic, and I love it. Like
Oh,
you,
thank you.
it's amazing.
Thank you. No, I so appreciate you having this discussion with me, and I appreciate all of the kind words that you're saying, and I appreciate that you hold space for us, and for everybody on your channel and in life.
Yeah, and I love your gentle demeanor. It shows like how inside you're a good person. And that's all we really need to be at the end of the day, is a good person. I feel like you emanate that. So thank you, Christian. And I appreciate you coming on. And thank you, audience members, for watching this long. You
Yeah.
are amazing. I love you guys. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thanks,
Bye,
Joyce.
all.